Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we have a little guest designer. My daughter, my 2-year-old, is crafting with me today. So if things are out, you can't see things, or you all of a sudden have an earthquake, it's because she bumped the camera, which, let's be honest, I bump the camera sometimes too. So anyway, what we have here is the Book Engravings stamp and die set from Altenew. We have some cream colored cardstock. We have a few inks. I have Gina K's Obsidian. We have Evergreen, Forest Glades. I don't actually use that one, the Honey Drizzle, but we have Almond Butter, Hazelnut, and Vanilla Cream. So I show you the blending brushes. We don't actually use those today. I'm not sure why I had those out. I do have a sanding block here and an embossing folder from Doris. This is just some little dots. I believe that there are tons of these little like Swiss dot embossing folders on the market. I'm showing you 2 colors of Copic marker or alcohol markers from Altenew. These are the 2 I'm not using today. She keeps wanting to wave at the camera. Anyway, so I have laid out the images that I want to use in my Misty here. We are going to use that dark brown cardstock, but not right now. So I'm going to take this Obsidian ink from Gina K, which is alcohol marker friendly. Now, I have struggled. The past 2 times that I have used this and used my alcohol markers, I have heat set it, and I felt like I've heat set it very, very well. But when I go over my stamped images with like a very light, it's typically been a yellow, I feel like it smears still, even though I've heat set it really well. And I'm not like scrubbing back and forth or anything, but I feel like it still smears. And you'll see that in some of the final pictures. I didn't feel like I needed to redo it just because some of the lines that the artist drew in, I feel like it's not a end of the world kind of thing, but it kind of has bothered me lately that I've heat set it and this ink is supposed to be safe with that particular medium, and I'm not getting very good results. So if you have a tip for me, or maybe I'm doing something wrong, or maybe maybe this ink isn't supposed to be safe for alcohol markers, let me know in the comments below if you've got some tips for me on that. So here we are stamping this image several times. I might need to re-ink my ink pad here. She's helping me put pressure on it. And then I'm going to flip this. I wanted to make sure that I had tons of images, and how I get my paper off of the mat is I bend the mat. I don't peel the paper off. When you bend the mat, it'll actually peel the paper away, and so you don't have to worry about kind of warping and bending your paper. So I'm going to stamp all these images a second time, and then we will move on to more of how we're going to add our color. So here I am going to heat set this, and like I said, I feel like even though I've heat set it, it still isn't making that much of a difference, but I am heat setting it. So again, if you got a tip, let me know. The next thing we're going to do is, if you'll notice, this stamp set, usually when you have a layering stamp set, it has a outline and then like a solid image to put color over the entire background of your floral. This stamp set doesn't have that. So that is why I have these alcohol markers here. I end up picking colors that are just too dark, and so I would end up actually using Forest Glades and Vanilla Cream artist markers from Altenew. These markers that I'm using here are they're just too dark. I picked my color inspiration actually from the packaging and the insert of this Altenew stamp set. And they used Vanilla Cream, Hazelnut, and that Almond Butter. And I thought it was really pretty and a really like different, but yet still kind of fall-ish color palette. And so I wanted to use it, but I'm putting this on here and I'm immediately thinking this is too dark. And it's got more of like it almost looks like it has some pink and red in it. And so it doesn't end up working. I don't end up using this particular flower right here. I'm going to go back and use a different color. Here I am bringing in that vanilla cream. This is going to work a lot better. And then I'm that green for the leaf that I used is too dark also, and here I am going to use the Forest Glades. So all I'm doing is applying a base coat of color. I'm not adding any shading. I'm not even worrying if like the coloring is splotchy, just because I know we're going to stamp over it, and the stamping is, those markers are going to even out as they dry. And then we're going to add some layers on top of it. So I'm not super concerned. I'm just trying to get a base layer. How this stamp set is designed is that color of your cardstock actually shows through, but I didn't want that for today's images. So here I have everything colored. Again, I don't like that one in the top left. It's just too dark for what I wanted to do today. And when you start to add the layers over it, it just looks weird. So I don't end up using that one, but I do end up using the others. And I even tried like swatching things out. And here, you can't really see it in the video, but I am showing you that there is some like streaking from that ink, from that Gina K amalgam ink. And now I'm gonna go ahead and clean my stamps off. I am using this Hero Art scrubber, and I have been using this for quite a while now, and I really, really like it. I have discovered that with my previous stamps, when I would clean them, I would get like fuzzies from my towel on it. And when I would go to stamp with them, I would see those fuzzies in my stamped image, and I really did not like that. So I have really, really enjoyed this Hero Art scrubber. I'm a big fan, 5 stars, love it. So I have placed the second layer into my MISTI. So these leaves only have 2 layers, and the flowers have 3 that I'm using, but they technically have 4. The 4th layer is the flower center, which I don't even worry about. I'm gonna end up adding some like gems into the middle of that, so I'm not even concerned about those. But I am gonna take, this is, I believe, hazelnut, and I'm gonna stamp that over as my second layer. So that stamp set, it actually has things layered and numbered, and there's actually an outline around what stamps go with what. So that is very helpful, as well as Altenew is really terrific about with their packaging. They include like a layering guide, so it'll show you like little registration marks or marks on the stamp that you can use to line things up better. And that is very helpful. If you have an older stamp set that's layering, and maybe you threw away that packaging, or maybe you purchased that stamp set before they started to do that, if you go onto their website, you can typically find a layering guide for them. I think they've come out with a lot of layering guides for their older stamp sets, and particularly with their newer ones, you can still find a layering guide on there. And if by chance you can't, go to Pinterest, or even Google it on YouTube or on Google, and you can typically find a layering guide. Either someone's come up with one, or there's one from the manufacturer on there. So for these leaves, I am stamping in the Forest Glades and the Evergreen. I just kind of did a section of each. I think this is the Forest Glades. And then when I rotate the paper, I'm going to stamp it in the Evergreen, just so that I have a little bit of variation. My Evergreen and my Forest Glades are kind of dry. I usually don't buy the re-inkers when I'm doing a mini ink cube, but if I'm buying a full-size ink pad, I try to get the re-inkers at the same time. But for these particular Altenew sets, I usually don't do that. Or anytime I have like an ink cube, I usually don't get the re-inker. So these are kind of dry. So for me, just because I have a limited amount of space is why I don't usually get the re-inkers if I have a cube. It's just cheaper and more space saving for me to just buy the ink pad again. I mean, I know that sounds kind of wasteful, but that seems to be what works for me. So here I rotated the paper. I have stamped in the Everglades, and I really like that contrast. I think that's really pretty. If you wanted to go through and add some more detail and maybe a third color to these, as these leaves only have 2, you could absolutely do that with like some colored pencils, or you could bring out your Copic markers again, or alcohol markers, however you wanted to do that. And that is the leaves done. So now we're going to move on to the third layer for the flowers. And for that, we're going to use this almond butter. So I just lined up that third image and stamped that out. Here I'm showing you kind of the contrast in the layers. Again, you can't really see it in the camera, but on the pictures you can see that it kind of bled. That flower didn't, but the alcohol marker layer that I put down at the very beginning to get an overall color, it bled in those top two, but it didn't in the bottom right. I don't understand, but whatever. So that is all of the images colored and stamped out, and now I'm going to take the, sorry, I bumped the camera that time. So, or no, maybe she did. No, I don't think she was up there with me at that time. I have all of the dies put in place, and I went and put those through my die cut machine and die cut them out. The only one I didn't die cut is the one that I just didn't like the coloring. So that went in the trash. Here I have some Paper Studio. This is just brown cardstock. It has a white core, and that is important for one of the steps that we're going to do this. So I have spritzed this up pretty high with just some water, clean, clear water. That's going to help prevent this paper from cracking because it is a lighter weight. And I'm going to use this embossing folder from Doris and run that through my die cut machine. I know that there are lots of these kind of Swiss dot type patterns out there, so use what you've got. So here I am taking, this is inspired by Jennifer McGuire, who is, you know, the GOAT. She, in a recent video that I watched, did this exact same thing. She had put something through her embossing folder and then took her sanding block and ran this through her, just kind of lightly rubbed over her paper. So all this is doing is removing the color from the very top layer of those dots and revealing the white core of this paper. So this is why it's important to have a paper with a white core or a core that is a different color than the outside, which they're typically white. I guess some of them are black, but they're typically white. So this sanding block I purchased off of Amazon, I think they came in like a pack of 4 or 5. This is the same one, and I've had these for years. So once I was happy with the amount of white that I had showing, I take my flour sackcloth here and wipe off my surface, my work surface, and I also wipe off this piece of paper here. Then I cut a piece of vellum down, and I cut it down to where it was like 4 1/4 or 4 by 5 1/4. I wanted more white. I wanted more of the border showing. So I cut it down to 3 3/4 by 5. And I liked the border that had. So here I'm gonna arrange my flowers how I want them. This arrangement actually came together pretty quick for me. I usually struggle and fidget and mess around for absolutely ever trying to get an arrangement that I like that looks balanced. As far as colors and composition. This one came together pretty quick, so I was pretty grateful. So once I get those in place, we're going to bring out some press and seal. All I've done is take a piece of press and seal and created a hinge. So I rubbed the press and seal all over the back of those, or the top of those flowers, because those were arranged how I wanted them. And then I flipped all that entire piece over, and I've applied Altenew Instant Dimension foam tape to it, so that this pops off the card just a little bit. And then once I had enough foam tape on there, I'm gonna flip this back over. My vellum piece moved a little bit, so I'm gonna try to finagle that back in place. And then once I'm happy with how it's going to be positioned on top of that vellum, then I'm gonna press everything down firmly. And that press and seal is gonna release from the cardstock. It's not gonna tear it at all. Which is like the beautiful thing about it. Again, we can thank Jennifer's husband. I think his name is Mark. Don't quote me on that, but I think his name is Mark McGuire for the creation of this awesome kitchen tool. If you are international, I understand that this is not readily available to you as it is in like the States. And so I do know that Simon Says Stamp does sell this in their store just because it is difficult for international people to get their hands on it. There are some pieces of this that are overlapping cardstock, and so they're not being held together by that foam tape. And so I am squishing just a little bit of liquid glue underneath that just to kind of secure everything in place. Then what we're going to do, because vellum is notoriously difficult to adhere because it is so see-through and you will see any adhesive you put on it unless you put adhesive over the entire thing, which if I would have been thinking, I would have done. And if I would have been thinking, I would have applied my sentiment before I put all these flowers down, but I wasn't. So I'm going to hide my adhesive behind these flowers, which this is a nice big area, so it does a good job of hiding my adhesive. I'm going to apply my adhesive all over the back of where these flowers are, and then that is what is going to ultimately hold this vellum piece onto this cardstock. Now, I had a bunch of pieces left over and I wanted to use them. So I am applying them to the front or to the inside of the card in just a little tiny arrangement. And then I will trim off the excess, and that just gives you a little something to carry over the outside of the card to the inside of the card, and lets you use some pieces that otherwise would either sit in the storage pocket for a long time or be trashed. Once that is done, I'm moving on to the sentiment. My sentiment today comes from the Simon Says Stamp Beautiful Friend stamp set, and this one says, "You are the best." I really liked that sentiment, and I really like this typography, this font, and we are going to heat emboss. Now, like I said before, you probably should have heat embossed on this before you put your flowers down, before you adhered it all to your card front, but I wasn't thinking, so it ends up working out just fine. So I am going to heat emboss, so I'm going to use my anti-static powder tool, rub that all over where my embossing is going to go. I'm going to use my VERSAMARK ink, and I am going to be using Ranger Platinum, liquid platinum embossing powder today. So I'm going to stamp this twice, just to ensure that I've got a good inked impression, and then sprinkle over my embossing powder and heat set it. So that is with the sentiment all heat set, and it does warp my vellum a little bit. So I'm going to squeeze just a little tiny dots of glue behind this embossing, and that's going to also help kind of keep that from popping up and maybe snagging on the envelope when you put it in there. Just do tiny, tiny drops, because any liquid adhesive, any adhesive that squishes out is going to be very, very visible because it is vellum. To add a bit of shine and to accentuate the centers of these florals, I'm using some iridescent gems from BLINGEE Thingy on Etsy. And then as a final bit of shine, I'm going to bring out my Spectrum Noir clear glitter brush pen. I've been using this in like every card I've made lately. And I'm gonna rub this all over every single one of these flowers. I didn't do the leaves, I just did the flowers. I just wanted those to be extra sparkly. I think my daughter whacks the camera very soon. Anyway, but that will be the end. That will finish off the card. I appreciate you spending time with me today. Thank you so much. And I'll be sure to thank our guest designer today. Anyway, that's all. I hope you have a great time, a great day. And again, I appreciate you spending time with me, and we will see you next time. Bye.